folder landed on the marble countertop with a sound like a gunshot. Zara Whitfield, 36 years old, director of the Whitfield Community Health Trust, did not flinch. She stood on the other side of the kitchen island in their Bethesda home, still in her coat, still holding her car keys. She had walked in 30 seconds ago. She had not even set down her bag. Across from her, Landon Merritt, 41 years old, Chief Operating Officer of Merritt Caldwell Medical Group, pressed both palms flat against the counter and looked at her the way people look at something they have already decided to throw away. "You went into my files," he said. Not a question, an accusation. Zara looked at the folder. She recognized it. It was the one she had found 3 nights ago, tucked behind the false back panel of the filing cabinet in his home office. The one he had installed 2 years ago and told her was for sensitive client documents. She had not been snooping. A hinge had broken. The panel had fallen, and there it was. "I found it," she said. "I didn't go looking." "That is not the point." "Then what is the point, Landon?" He straightened. He was tall and he knew how to use it. "The point is that those documents don't concern you. The point is that you had no right." Zara set her keys down on the counter slowly, deliberately, the way you set something down when your hands are shaking and you do not want anyone to see. "Holdin payments routed through a shell company," she said. "Procurement invoices signed off before the contracts were executed. $11.4 million in capital expenditure that doesn't correspond to a single completed project." She paused. "Tell me which part of that doesn't concern me." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of things neither of them said. Landon picked up the folder. He walked to the other side of the room, opened the drawer beneath the wet bar, and dropped it inside. Then he turned around. "You need to stay out of things you don't understand," he said. That was all. He walked upstairs. She heard the bedroom door close, not slam. Close, controlled, the way Landon did everything. Zara stood in the kitchen for a long time after that. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed. She looked at the drawer. Then she looked at her hands. She had understood exactly what she saw. That was the problem. She had met Landon 8 years ago at a hospital fundraising gala in Washington, D.C. He was polished, focused, and funny in the specific way that accomplished men learn to be funny. Just enough to disarm you, never enough to make you forget who they were. She was running the Trust's outreach division at the time, 28 years old, already managing a $4 million grant portfolio. Her mother had called her overqualified for the event. Her father had not said anything. Her father rarely did. They were married 14 months later. For the first 3 years, she had believed in the life they were building. The house in Bethesda, the annual dinners with his colleagues, the quiet weekends she spent working on grant proposals while he took calls in the other room. She had told herself that the distance between them was professional, that it was temporary, that this was what it looked like when 2 driven people built something together. She had been good at believing that. The cracks did not appear all at once. They came slowly, the way water damage comes, invisible until the ceiling starts to bow. A conference in Houston that ran 4 days longer than scheduled. A password changed on a shared account she had never thought to question before. A new habit of tilting his phone face down whenever she walked into a room. She had not confronted him. Not yet. She had filed things away the way she filed grant discrepancies, quietly, methodically, waiting until the picture was complete. The Folktale had completed it. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and a legal pad and worked through what she had seen, writing it out the way her father had taught her to work through problems, column by column, date by date. Her father had been an accountant before he retired. He had told her once that numbers did not lie. People lied about numbers. The numbers themselves always told the truth, if you were willing to read them. The Ventus had gone to a company called Veltrus Consulting Group. She searched the name. A Delaware LLC registered 18 months ago. No website, no listed principal. The registered agent was a law firm in Wilmington that specialized in corporate privacy structures. The contracts corresponding to those payments, she had memorized the invoice numbers from the folder, did not appear in any of the public procurement disclosures Merritt Caldwell filed with the hospital systems they contracted with. That was not unusual on its own. Private medical groups were not required to disclose all vendor relationships, but the amounts were $11.4 million over 14 months to a company with no public footprint, no verifiable employees, no deliverables she could trace in any of the project completion reports she had found in the folder alongside the invoices. Someone was siphoning money, and whoever had set up the structure had been careful, but not careful enough. They had left the folder, or they had not known she was ever it. She put down her pen at 2:30 in the morning and looked at what she had written. Then she looked at the stairs. The woman's name was Sable. That was what one of the nurses at Landon's firm had called her Months ago, in a conversation Zara had not been meant to hear. A consultant, that was the official description, brought in to advise on operational restructuring. Very good at her job. Her actual name, Zara found out in a 40-minute search the following afternoon, was Tessa Aldrin, 33 years old, formerly a financial analyst at a wealth management firm in Atlanta, now listed as managing director of Veltrus Consulting Group, managing director of the Shell Company. She sat with that for a long time. Then she called her friend Nina, who was a family law attorney in Silver Spring, and asked if they could have coffee. Nina listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Zara had always loved about her. She sat across the table at the cafe on Georgia Avenue, her hands wrapped around a mug, and she listened to all of it. The folder, the invoices, the Shell Company, the woman. When Zara finished, Nina set down her mug. "How much documentation do you?" asked. "What I memorized. Photographs I took on my phone before he found out I'd seen it." "Did he know you photographed it?" "No." Nina nodded. Slowly. "Okay. The financial irregularities. That's potentially criminal exposure for him. The firm he works for has a fiduciary responsibility to the hospital systems they contract with. If that money was redirected, it was. If it was," Nina said carefully, "then we're talking about fraud, possibly at the federal level, depending on whether any of those hospital systems receive Medicare or Medicaid funding." They did. Zara knew they did. She had checked. "What do I do?" Zara said. Nina looked at her. "You protect yourself first. Everything else comes after." 2 weeks later, Landon came home from work and found Zara sitting at the dining room table. Not at her laptop, not working, just sit. On the table in front of her was a single manila envelope. Landon stopped in the doorway. He looked at the envelope, then at her. "What is that?" he said. "Sit down," she said. "Zara, please sit down, Landon." He sat. He was trying to read her face and not finding what he was looking for. That was new. In 8 years, he had always been able to read her face. She had let him. "The vendor payments to Veltrus Consulting Group," she said. "I know what they were for. I know who Tessa Aldrin is. I know about the operational restructuring contract that was never delivered. And I know that 3 of the hospital systems Merritt Caldwell contracts with are federally funded providers." The color left his face in stages. "I haven't gone to anyone yet," she said. "That is a choice I'm making right now, in this conversation. I want you to understand that, Zara." His voice had changed. The authority was gone from it. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." She slid the envelope across the table. "That's a copy of what I've documented. The original is with my attorney. There's also a copy in a location neither of us is going to discuss." He did not touch the envelope. "I'm going to need a few from you," she said. "And I think, given everything, you're going to want to be cooperative." She had not planned to feel anything in this moment. She had spent 2 weeks preparing for it, rehearsing it, stripping the emotion out of it, the way you strip a wire before you connect it. But sitting across from him, watching the man she had believed in, had built a life with, had defended to people who had tried to warn her, she felt something move through her chest. Not anger, grief, quick and clean and then gone. She kept her face still. What happened in the weeks that followed was not simple. It was not a clean, satisfying sequence of events. It was paperwork and phone calls and 2 separate meetings with Nina at the office downtown and 1 very long conversation with Zara's father, who listened without saying much and then said, "You handled it right," which was, from him, everything. Landon's attorney called Nina's office within 48 hours of the dining room conversation. The language was conciliatory. The posture was not quite surrender but something close to it. The posture of a man who had calculated his exposure and found the number unacceptable. The separation agreement was drafted within 3 weeks. Landon did not contest the terms. He could not afford to, in more ways than one. What he could not have anticipated, what no one except Nina and Zara's father and 1 other person knew, was the question of the Whitfield Trust's assets. Here is what Zara had not told Landon in 8 years of marriage, not because she was hiding it, but because it had never come up in the way that such things come up between people who trust each other. Her mother's family name was not Whitfield by coincidence. The Whitfield Community Health Trust, which Zara directed and had directed for 4 years, was not a small non-profit funded by grants and individual donors. It was a private philanthropic entity established by her grandfather, Edmund Whitfield, in 1987, capitalized originally at $60 million, and now, through decades of strategic investment, managed by a board of trustees and a private investment office that oversaw assets totaling approximately $1.8 billion. Zara was the sole named beneficiary of the Whitfield Family Trust, which held controlling interest in the investment office. She had known this since she was 22, when her grandfather had sat across from her at a kitchen table in Richmond, Virginia, and explained it to her the way he explained most things, without ceremony, without dramatics, as a simple statement of fact and responsibility. He had died 3 years later. The assets had passed as he'd described. She had continued working, running the trust's outreach programs, writing grant proposals, going to galas, living in a house in Bethesda with a man she believed in. She had not hidden it from Landon, she had simply never led with it. The people who led with it, in her experience, were people who had nothing else to lead with. She found out later, from a mutual acquaintance who spoke without thinking, that Tessa Aldrin had asked about Zara once, early in her relationship with Landon, had asked what she did, what her family was like, whether she had money of her own. Landon had told her Zara worked for a small health non-profit and came from a modest family in Richmond. He had genuinely believed that. The morning the separation agreement was finalized, Zara drove to her office on Wisconsin Avenue. She sat at her desk and looked out the window for a while. The street was busy, the way Wisconsin Avenue is always busy in the morning. People walking with coffee, cars edging through the intersection, a woman jogging with a stroller. Her assistant knocked and brought in the day's correspondence. Zara thanked her and set it aside. She pulled up the trust's investment dashboard. 1.8 billion give or take. 43 employees between the trust and the investment office. 17 active grant partnerships with community health organizations across the mid-Atlantic. A capital commitment to a new clinic network in Baltimore that would break ground in the spring. She approved 2 transfers, signed off on a board memo, and responded to a message from the head of their Baltimore initiative. Then she opened a new document and began drafting a statement for the trust's annual report. The Whitfield Community Health Trust was founded on the belief that access to care is not a privilege. That line had been in every annual report since her grandfather wrote it in 1989. She kept it every year. Not because it was expected, because it was still true. Landon called her once, 3 weeks after the agreement was signed. She did not pick up. He left a voicemail that started with her name and stopped before he said anything else. She deleted it. Tessa Aldrin left her position at Merritt Caldwell Medical Group the same week the separation agreement was executed. Zara found this out not because she was watching, but because Nina mentioned it in passing. The way lawyers mention things they think you should know without making too much of them. The Merritt Caldwell board opened an internal audit in the second month after Landon's quiet demotion. He was moved out of the CO role and into an advisory position, which is what happens when a company decides someone is a liability but isn't ready to make it public. The audit firm was brought in from outside. It was thorough. It took 4 months. Zara was not involved. She had given Nina the documentation and let it move through the appropriate channels, the way you release something into a current and trust the water to carry it. There were things she had not expected to feel. She had not expected the specific loneliness of sitting in a house that was now just hers. She had not expected the way certain rooms would feel inhabited by his absence more than his presence had ever filled them. She had not expected to miss the version of him she had believed in, the version that had probably never been entirely real, or had been real once, and then gradually stopped. She had not expected her mother to say, at dinner one Sunday in Richmond, with the careful gentleness of a woman who had wanted to say this for longer than she'd been allowed to, "You were always more than that house, baby." She had not expected to cry in the car on the way home. Not from sadness exactly, from something more complicated than sadness, the relief of being seen, the grief of time. She let herself feel it. She had always been better at feeling things in private. The audit findings became a matter of public record in the fall, when Merritt Caldwell Medical Group settled with 3 federally funded hospital systems for a sum that was reported in the trades as significant. Landon Merritt was not criminally charged. He was, however, named in the civil settlement as a responsible party, which meant his name was attached to a public document that would outlast the news cycle by several decades. His attorney had, at some point in the process, attempted to pursue a marital asset claim that included, theoretically, Zara's interest in the Whitfield Trust. That attempt lasted approximately 1 meeting. After that meeting, there were no further asset claims. In November, Zara attended the Trust's annual gala at the National Building Museum. She wore a dark green dress her mother had sent her from a boutique in Richmond, with a note that said, "Only wear this." She wore it. The room was full of people she knew and people she was learning to know. Grant partners, hospital administrators, city council members who had come to see what the Whitfield Trust was funding in their districts. A journalist from the Post who was writing a piece on private philanthropy and community health. Zara had agreed to a brief interview. No photographs. Nina was there. Her father was there, in a grey suit that he'd had since the 90s and refused to replace because it still fit. At some point in the evening, one of the Trust's longtime board members, a woman named Gloria, 71 years old, who had known Zara's grandfather and had the posture of someone who had seen everything and could not be impressed by most of it, found Zara near the windows that looked out over F Street and said, without preamble, "You handled this year well." Zara looked at her. "I mean the whole year," Gloria said. "Thank you," Zara said. Gloria nodded once. Then she moved on to the next conversation, the way people move on when they have said precisely what they meant and do not need an answer. Zara stayed at the window for a moment longer. The street outside was lit in the way DC lights up in November, federal buildings glowing, traffic slow and steady, pedestrians moving quickly in the cold. She had refused the full settlement Landon's attorney offered in month 2, not because it was inadequate, because accepting it would have required a silence clause, and she did not make agreements she could not honor. She had taken only what was legally hers, which was enough. It had always been enough. She had given 8 years to a version of a life that turned out to be built on someone else's choices, someone else's dishonesty, someone else's calculation of what she was worth. And she had walked out of it with her name intact, and her work continuing, and her father in a grey suit across the room, nodding at something a hospital administrator was telling him. The journalist found her a few minutes later. "Mrs. Whitfield, I have just a few questions when you're ready." Zara turned from the window. "I'm ready," she said.